Hey folks, Kevin here. I think it's March 28th, 2020. I'm a little tuckered out today, so I'm not at the top of my game. Last couple days I've been working out in the perennial beds and pruning blackberry bushes and digging out some of the nuts and seeds that we've had stored over winter and all, the outdoor, the ones that we propagate trees from. So I'm exhausted and I'm very sore, very achy today. But I thought I'd try and address one of the questions that James Steffens asked, and that is, what do I do about quackgrass around my fruit trees? Full disclosure, I have lost the war on quackgrass. Well, I wouldn't say I've lost the war with bindweed. I've won many battles with quackgrass. But because of some of the features and characteristics of this tenacious weed, I thought it'd be worthwhile sharing what I know so far. Now, another full disclosure, we're completely organic. Will I use vinegar to help kill back some weeds at times? Yes, but other than that, no chemicals here on site. And I seldom use vinegar. But let me talk a little bit about it. So, and I wrote notes in my Evernote file here. So, quackgrass is a cool season perennial crop, perennial weed, and it loves the northeastern part of the United States because we're a cold, temperate climate, and we have extremes of wet, moist areas and not desert-like, but pretty warm periods as well. And that just fits perfectly with this invasive plant. So it didn't come from North America. It was introduced, I believe, in alfalfa seed, many years ago. I don't really know the whole history, but it's an introduced weed in the United States. The thing that makes it so challenging is, well, one of the things that makes it so challenging is the rhizome. So like an iris that comes back every year and produces this big, beautiful flower, the rhizome is the warehouse. That's where all the carbohydrates are stored during the winter months and all. And this grass has a tremendous storage unit in the form of a rhizome and roots. So all those carbohydrates during the spring and especially June, July, and August are stored in that root system, and so that's one of the advantages of this invasive plant. Yes, it can reproduce by seed as well, but it does extend and produce more weeds because of extension of that rhizome. So we get these lateral roots, these long roots that go out, and then a new the aerial part, the part that's above the ground, gets exposed. And once there's 3 or 4 leaves there, well, then that's a brand new plant in a sense. It'll start making those carbohydrates and extending the lateral roots out, start creating the rhizome area, which can store all those nutrients there so that it can survive the next winter. And these lateral roots can be, at least a couple of feet long. Now the bindweed, that can go 15, 20 feet in length, their lateral roots out. I don't know just how far these buggers go because digging them out is a real challenge. And I mentioned that the plant probably came in alfalfa stores from the Mediterranean. Let's see. They can grow between 1 and 4 feet tall. Around here, where I've let it get tall enough and see will the winter deer knock it down. The deer don't like it nearly as much as other plants, so it's one of those plants of last resort for them to consume during the winter months. The rabbits don't eat it. It's their last choice. So, and it probably has to do with some phytotoxic components within the grass itself, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But not enough to harm them. All right, it isn't that. It probably tastes like us tasting something that's really terribly bitter for most of us that don't like bitter things. So it stores the sugars in the roots and the rhizome in late summer so that it can survive the winter and start regrowth and spreading in the springtime. quackgrass seed can begin to take root in the fall after the field has been disturbed. And if there's some moisture there, so if you're doing your annual gardens and all, that seed from the quackgrass can be deposited by wind blown or by birds or whatever, and end up in the surface of the soil. And then when you pull the crop out, those, as long as they get 3 to 4 leaves in the late fall, which I've seen happen many times around here, and those seeds can sit there dormant during the whole time that the corn is growing or whatever crops you have in that bed. But then after you pull that plant out, and you're just letting the area go dormant for the winter time, and it's exposed soil, well, those darn quackgrass seeds germinate and set up 3 to 4 leaves, then start the process of putting those sugars back into the rhizome, and now it's established. You could go in and flame with it, you could do anything you want. That bugger already will come back up in the springtime. So that's a challenge as well. Let's see, rhizome development is greatest during June, July, and August. Killing it does not eliminate the problem. Here we go with some of the, why doesn't it eliminate the problem when you kill the plant? Well, quackgrass is an allelopathic releasing phytotoxin into the soil around the area that it died. And this can be even the lateral roots. So if you mow it down or you till it, well, those phytotoxins are there, which inhibit germination of some of the more beneficial crops you want. Sort of like the allelopathic properties of some of the nut trees, like the black walnut tree. So that makes it a bit of a challenge. When one study showed that phytotoxicity is maximal about 7 to 10 days after cutting the weed down. So once quackgrass grows 3 or 4 leaves, they start sending out lateral rhizomes as well. So 3 to 4 leaves, they start sending the sugars down into the rhizome. They're doing storage, and they're also sending out lateral roots. Tenacious little bugger they are. So prevention. There's prevention, control, and you can break your control down into different systems, but this is the way I think about preventing. Identify, isolate, attack, if possible, eliminate, allow for recovery of the soil because of the phytotoxicity, seed or transplant into the area after that several day period of the phytotoxicities being active there, and support and monitor. So identify. So first thing we have to do is find the spots on our property where it is. I failed there, and I continue to fail because I get so darn busy and I'm not doing my close observation. We've got this under control in our permanent raised beds and all that. But when you go out to our fruit trees and berry bushes and all those areas, that's a big problem out there. So how do we control this thing? So soil management is number one. So what do I mean by that? Well, this quackgrass really likes a bacterially dominated soil. And so we need to try and do our soil succession, gradually transition that barren soil from a lawn type soil to a more fungally dominated soil, or at least an intermediate between bacterial dominated to fungally dominated. And I'll try to remember to put a link up in the upper right hand corner to soil succession. If I don't put it there because I get busy here, just search the channel for the video it's about soil succession. That may help to clarify the stages and the microorganisms in the soil. So if we're monitoring everything closely, and we're checking our soil, and we're incorporating carbonaceous materials there, whether it's through sheet mulching or wood chips or whatever it may be, trying to get the soil to make transition. And certainly you can use compost teas as well, but you want to make sure that you're starting off, you're bringing in some of those fungally dominated microorganisms, and you have the food resources there for those microorganisms, because that will make it less of an easy vacation for the quackgrass to take over that area. So soil management is number one, maintaining appropriate perennial ground cover. So the plant that I find that works the best as far as of not being as affected by the phytotoxins, being able to establish a good foothold in the soil there. There's two different ones, white clover and the red clover. Those, and please, if you've got other plants that do extremely well against quackgrass and that aren't as susceptible to the phytotoxicity of it, please leave your comments down below. But certainly using white clover or red clover. Another approach could be, and I've done this, and unless you stay on top of it, you will ultimately lose a battle if it's at the margins, it's sheet mulching and weed mats. Sheet mulching and weed mats really do a good job of knocking it down right off the bat, and we can do that around fruit trees, and hopefully I'll remember to mention that at the very end as well. So sheet mulching and weed mats. And I have videos on sheet mulching and I have videos on weed mats as well. Competitive inhibition. So that means, you know, there's resources in the soil. So let's say we've got our soil, so we're increasing the brown materials, the rich carbon sources, the wood chips, it could be sawdust even mixed in, or the straw, and we're putting these materials there that fungi like to consume. We're getting that, and so we're building our soil, and we're increasing the transition to a more fungal organisms being in that soil. So we've already done that. Then we want to put some other plants that are there, like the white clover that can handle fungally dominated, or red clover that can handle it, or any other ground cover that you got that can gradually, and I mean gradually, expand their domain. So you may remember in some of the Western garden plot videos that I did, or the one where I transplanted so many white clover plants over into the asparagus bed, because I'm using that as a competitive inhibitor for some of the weeds that want to grow up over there. And it's worked pretty well so far, not completely, because I didn't have enough. So you basically want to get a whole lawn cover area, and at the base of a fruit tree you'd want to expand it. You may want to have like 3 feet all the way around it of nothing but white clover there. But again, there's challenges doing this, and so that's why always having areas that you keep devoid of any quackgrass, and you're purposely propagating your own ground cover, and you're getting good root development in those areas, and then you can take those plants and transplant out. And you don't clear out the whole area, you take patches. You do a 1 foot square, if you will, but you leave all 4 sides of the clover around there, and it'll move into that 1 foot square. So every 2 years you can go in and harvest from a ground cover propagation system. I hope that makes sense. All right, so plant high yielding varieties adapted to climate, soil, and field conditions. And so here it's the white clover and the red clover that I've found so far. Plant competitive crops when the soil conditions are optimal, and plant them closely together. So you just want to be mindful of each plant that you're using as a competitive inhibitor, what they actually need to get a good establishment before the weather changes. And in this area, it's the winter. We have the rains and the freezing snow. So the white clover and the red clover actually can go into the ground in the fall. And as long as we got some sunlight still hitting them in the fall and they aren't getting flooded out, those plants are going to take off and be there for the next year. And if we maintain the soil around them, whether we put cardboard down or whatever material down, that can give those competitive inhibitive plants. And the reason I'm using competitive inhibition is because we're trying to inhibit the undesirable weed, that quackgrass. So by by promoting those ones that are our allies, that works out very, very well. Let's see, mechanical control. So these are the things that I've used for my approach to trying to knock down the burden on these plants. So my dad was in World War II in the Battle of the Bulge. He was in the 101st Airborne, and because of knowing that story, and he was injured during the war as well, but because of knowing that story, there was a movie, The Battle of the Bulge, that I watched. And one of the things that really struck me about an invasive organism or invasive army, whatever it may be, one of the things that ended up working out for the Allies was cutting off the fuel supply. So that was these Panzers and Tiger tanks were wreaking havoc during the war. But they're only as good as when they have the supplies there. And so that's one of the things, is cutting off the supplies. Sorry about the sidetrack, but I always think analogies in some of these situations. And so what we want to do is cut off the supply line for invasive weeds. So like I mentioned, once the plant emerges and the aerial part, the part that gets up exposed to the air, is there, and we get 3 to 4 leaves, photosynthesis is happening. It's taking carbon dioxide and taking water and making carbohydrates, which it's very greedy about. It doesn't share. It takes all of those nutrients and puts it into the rhizome and those lateral roots going out to the side. So we want to keep that. We want to keep it mowed or weed whacked right down to a low level. We're cutting off the fuel supply. So it's like, what would be ideal is if I went out there twice a week with a weed whacker and just cut them right down to basically ground level. So that would be ideal. The other way is sheet mulching or using wheat mats. That decreases the chances for photosynthesis. Again, their way of getting the carbohydrates to feed their reserves. And those reserves make those tanks do all the destructive damage and spread out. Another way is using occultation, and I've talked about this in previous videos. That's using like black tarps. A weed mat can be used as this sort of system. Black plastic can be used as well. So we have the black, and that doesn't allow the sun to go through that black plastic or the tarp. But because it's black, it really heats up. So there's some thermal damage to those weeds. And it's making so that those weeds can't get that solar radiation to make the carbohydrates to resupply those roots. But when they're next to a fruit tree, some little parts will come right up next to the trunk, and that's a challenge as well. So that means going out there and managing and cutting those off. And if you got food forests like we've got, I can't do it. I just physically can't be in all those locations, so that's a challenge. But cutting off their supplies by either weed whacking them right down to almost ground level and killing them off, and with a weed whacker or mower, you're also knocking down your plants, your desirable plants that are competitively inhibiting that that undesirable weed. And if you can get out there, if you only got a couple of trees, maybe you could use scissors just to cut them down, or shears. And when they first start emerging, you can sprinkle a little bit of vinegar on them, white vinegar, which their first emerging leaves seem to be sensitive to. But once those leaves develop their tenacious cell walls, their hardy cell walls, the vinegar doesn't seem to affect them at all. Another way is using solarization. So solarization, that's when we use clear plastic. So anybody who's ever taken a piece of clear plastic out on a nice hot sunny day and laid it out on their lawn and didn't pick it up, if it's just one layer thick, you'll see it's all yellow or brown afterwards. Well, that kills off the top part, and it also heats up the surface of the soil, which damages some of the microorganisms. But that may be your way of getting things under control. And I mentioned these two mechanisms for if you say, geez, this spring I'm going to start a garden, you can use occultation or solarization using black plastic or clear plastic to kill the lawn and kill the weeds that are out there. Those weeds, you need to go longer duration if they have a rhizome or root system that's hardy and it has lots of reserves. Big fuel station underneath the surface of the ground. Excuse me. We can use flame weeding. So flame weeding is one of the ways, but flame weeding is really designed so that it damages those very first little roots, seedlings that are emerging from the surface. But you're not trying to burn those little seedlings. You're just hitting them enough when they're first emerging that their cotyledon or their first real leaves or second real leaves, they're still very, very easily thermally injured. So that heat hits them, just like if you take your transplants and put them out in full sun after being inside just under shop lights or LED lights, you put them out in full sun, well, they take a beating because they're not used to all of that solar radiation, all those photons hitting them. And it really stresses them out. In some plants, it'll kill. So by using a flamethrower, if you will, not like in World War II, but using a propane or butane source, heating source, you can hit them. So basically, you'd use a combination of using these other techniques, and then you see, geez, I pull the tarp back, well, there's some nice little yellow leaves over there. They're more friable, they're more easily damageable by using a heat source like a flame weeder as well. What else? Digging them up. Now, in most of the online resources, when I check my notes here, they're talking about not just using all the herbicides like Roundup and all, but they're also talking about plowing and tilling. And it's been my experience when it comes to quackgrass that if you break up if you were to rototill the quackgrass, what you've done is you've just spread it around, just like bindweed. Those carbohydrate-rich food stores have enough stem cells that they'll send up a new plant afterwards. But people will talk about retilling it and retilling. And if you have high winds or you have rains, you can get soil erosion and you're working against yourself. Because high winds and soil erosion from rain and all, well, we get to bacterially dominated soil, which is ideal for these tenacious weeds to take off in the first place. Do I have any more notes? I think that's it. So I've lost many battles. I've won some battles. But the war rages on here with quackgrass. And quackgrass is probably my biggest nemesis here on our property. So I don't have any tremendous pearls of wisdom. Many people who are similar to me use the organic herbicides. I have no intentions of ever using those. The more that I spend the time working on converting the soil, we make the soil less desirable. It's like sleeping in your car if you're used to sleeping in a nice warm bed. If you have the choice of sleeping in a nice warm bed or sleeping in your car here in Oswego, New York during the winter time, well, you'll sleep in a nice warm bed. So we want that soil to be ideal for our beneficial companion plants, including the clovers and ground covers and all, and be less desirable to these tenacious weeds. It's really tough when we're talking about I would not disturb the soil when we're talking about many of these fruit, nut, and berry bushes and trees and all, because those roots are very sensitive. Like if we try to eliminate quackgrass around blueberry bushes, their roots are so close to the surface that the actual quackgrass is completely intertwined within them. And that's why you'll see in some of the areas that where I have quackgrass, I have the black mats down to help combat that as well. So I guess this video is getting too long once again. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. By all means, if you found systems that I haven't mentioned here that has worked well for quackgrass or witchweed, whatever you want to call it, please give those below. If you found this video valuable, please give us a thumbs up and share it with your friends. That helps to grow the channel as well. Thanks so much for watching, folks, and you folks have a great day. Bye-bye now.